Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Operative. Riley Blackwood stared at the blood pooling beneath the Russian oil magnate's lifeless body. After 15 years in the field, this was supposed to be his final assignment. The contract had come directly from the highest levels of government. Unofficial, of course. An untraceable digital transfer of $3 million had already hit his offshore account. Housekeeping required in the penthouse, Riley muttered into his encrypted satellite phone. The cleanup crew would arrive within minutes, erasing any evidence he was ever there. He slipped the custom-made ceramic knife into its sheath and began removing his gloves. That's when his personal phone vibrated. The screen displayed Trevor, and Riley's stomach knotted. His 16-year-old son never called during an operation. He knew better. Something was wrong. Riley answered immediately. Trevor. Dad. The boy's voice came in terrified gasps. Mom's new boyfriend and his men are here. They've got me tied up. Riley's blood turned to ice. 6 months ago, he had agreed to Marlene's divorce request. His work had created an unbridgeable gap between them. The separation had been surprisingly amicable considering his profession. She didn't ask questions about his government consulting work, and he provided generously for her and Trevor. The boyfriend, Damon Wolfe, had appeared 3 months ago. Riley had run a background check, of course. Former military with a private security company. Nothing concerning had appeared in his files. They said they'll force me to film when they execute you on the lawn. Trevor continued, his voice breaking. Riley's body tensed, switching to the cold, analytical state that had kept him alive through dozens of high-risk operations. I'm coming. Stay calm. I swore they'd pay. They just spat, and they made me polish their damn shoes. The phrase hit Riley like a thunderbolt. Years ago, he'd established emergency code words with Trevor. Polish their shoes meant imminent danger, communication compromised. I'll be home immediately. Riley ended the call. His mind raced as he exited the hotel through a service entrance. Damon Wolfe was clearly not who he appeared to be. The timing, immediately after Riley's final mission, couldn't be coincidental. Someone had made the connection between Riley Blackwood, suburban father, and the Ghost, the government's most effective covert operative. As his rented Audi tore down the Moscow streets toward the airport, Riley made 2 calls. The first to his handler, Lewis. Protocol broken arrow, Riley said when Lewis answered. My cover's compromised. Family in danger. Jesus, Lewis muttered. How bad? Terminal. I need emergency extraction from Sheremetyevo to Baltimore within the hour. Already working on it. What else? Full file on Damon Wolfe. Everything classified, everything redacted. Send it to my secure channel. His second call went to an unlisted number. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Armory. This is Ghost. My storage unit in Baltimore. Activate it. I'm coming in hot. The flight from Moscow to Baltimore was the longest 9 hours of Riley's life. In the privacy of the government transport plane, he reviewed the classified file on Damon Wolfe that Lewis had sent. His jaw tightened as the truth unfolded. Wolfe wasn't just former military. He had been Special Activities Division, CIA's most clandestine paramilitary operations unit. But 6 years ago, Wolfe had disappeared during an operation in Yemen. Intelligence suggested he had switched sides, selling classified information to various terrorist organizations and hostile governments. The coincidence was too perfect. Wolfe had seduced Marlene to get to Riley. Whether it was revenge or a contract hit, Riley would find out before he killed him. As the plane began its descent into Baltimore, Riley studied the satellite images of his suburban home. If Wolfe was as good as his file suggested, he would have at least 4 men positioned around the property. The elegant colonial house that had once represented Riley's attempt at normalcy now looked like a death trap. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but Riley recognized the source. Storage unit ready. Additional package included. Good hunting. By the time Riley pulled up to the nondescript storage facility on the outskirts of Baltimore, night had fallen. Unit 413 opened with his retinal scan. Inside, his emergency cache awaited. Weapons, tactical gear, cash, and multiple identities. The additional package turned out to be building plans for his own house, including recent modifications made since he'd last been home. Someone had installed a panic room. Someone had prepared for war. Riley glanced at his watch. 12 hours since Trevor's call. Whatever Wolfe was planning, it would happen soon. Riley began methodically preparing for battle, his mind focused on a single thought. Nobody who threatened his son would live to tell about it. Chapter 2. The Betrayal. 2 years earlier, Riley had been in Caracas when the first cracks in his marriage appeared. He remembered the phone call clearly. "I can't do this anymore, Riley," Marlene had said, her voice distant despite the clear connection. "You missed Trevor's championship game. Again. The consulate situation. Don't. Just don't." She sighed. "We both know your consulting takes priority. It always has." Riley had wanted to explain that the consulate situation had actually been him preventing a biological weapon from being sold to terrorists, potentially saving thousands of lives. But those were words he could never speak. That night, as he nursed a whiskey in his hotel room, Riley made a decision. After 15 years in the field, he would complete one final mission and then retire. For Trevor's sake. Perhaps even to salvage what remained of his marriage. Now, as Riley loaded the last magazine into his tactical vest, he wondered if that decision had accelerated the current crisis. Had his retirement plans somehow tipped off Wolf? Had Marlene inadvertently revealed something? The dossier on Wolf revealed more disturbing connections. Before disappearing in Yemen, Wolf had been investigating the assassination of a Ukrainian energy minister, a hit that Riley had carried out under direct orders from the Secretary of State. The official record showed Wolf's team had been ambushed by local militants, with Wolf presumed dead. Clearly, that presumption had been wrong. Riley's secure phone buzzed with an incoming message from Lewis. A video file. His hand trembled slightly as he opened it. The footage showed a security camera view of his living room. Trevor sat bound to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Marlene paced nervously while Wolf lounged on the sofa, casually cleaning a handgun. Four other armed men were visible in the frame. "We've been monitoring their communications," Lewis wrote beneath the video. "Chatter suggests they're expecting you to make a move tomorrow at dawn. They mentioned the plan several times, but no specifics. Satellite thermal imaging shows 6 warm bodies in the house." Riley studied Marlene's body language in the video. Was she a victim or an accomplice? The way she avoided looking at Trevor suggested guilt. The occasional glances toward Wolf carried more complexity than fear alone. He scrolled back through mental snapshots of the past year. Marlene's unexplained weekend trips. Her sudden interest in his work schedule. The new private email account he'd discovered but never confronted her about. At the time, he'd assumed it was related to the divorce. Now a darker possibility emerged. Had she been feeding information to Wolf all along? Riley accessed home security logs through his encrypted laptop. 6 months ago, while he was on assignment in Singapore, someone had logged into his home office computer using Marlene's credentials. Files had been accessed, nothing classified, as those were never kept at home, but personal records, schedules, contacts. The final piece clicked into place when Riley checked the property records for their house. 3 months ago, while finalizing the divorce, Marlene had added a second name to the deed, Damon Wolf. "You fool," Riley whispered to himself. Whatever Wolf had promised Marlene, love, money, a normal life, had been enough to blind her to the danger she was placing their son in. Riley studied the building plans one last time, memorizing every entrance, every blind spot. The house had been his sanctuary, designed with security in mind, features that Wolf would now be using against him. But Riley had incorporated elements that even Marlene didn't know about. As midnight approached, Riley loaded his equipment into a nondescript van. The property backed onto a small nature preserve, his entry point. Wolf would expect him to come at dawn, but Riley had survived 15 years in the field by never doing the expected. Before leaving the storage unit, Riley placed one final call. "Foster," answered a sleepy voice. "It's Blackwood. I need to call in that favor." Silence, then. "After Beirut, I owe you my life." "What do you need?" "A distraction. Police dispatch, fire alarm, anything to draw attention away from my property for 30 minutes. 2 a.m. Consider it done." "And Riley?" "Good luck." As Riley drove toward his neighborhood, he reflected on the life he'd created and lost. The marriage that had begun with such promise had dissolved into betrayal. The home he'd built to protect his family had become a trap. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Trevor, the only person Riley had ever truly allowed himself to love unconditionally. He parked the van 3 blocks away and made his final preparations. thermal imaging goggles, combat knife, silenced Glock 19, backup weapon strapped to his ankle, smoke grenades, tactical vest. At precisely 1:55 a.m., Riley Blackwood disappeared into the darkness of the nature preserve. The ghost was hunting again, but this time, it was personal. Chapter 3. The Infiltration. The nature preserve behind Riley's property offered perfect cover, dense enough to conceal his approach, but maintained well enough to move quietly through. As he navigated the familiar terrain, Riley recalled teaching Trevor to identify animal tracks along these same paths. At exactly 2 a.m., a cacophony of sirens erupted from 3 blocks away. Foster had come through, a 4-car pileup with no injuries, but plenty of emergency response. Through his thermal imaging goggles, Riley observed movement inside the house. 2 of the heat signatures converged near the front windows, drawn by the commotion. Riley reached the edge of his property and paused behind a large oak tree. The expansive lawn that had hosted Trevor's birthday parties and neighborhood barbecues now lay exposed under the pale moonlight, a killing field with no cover. Wolf would have predicted an approach from the woods, but Riley had designed his home's security system himself. He knew its weaknesses. Moving silently along the property line, Riley reached the northeastern corner where a drainage pipe ran beneath the decorative stone wall. The pipe itself was too small for a man to crawl through, but Riley wasn't interested in the pipe. He was interested in what was hidden inside it. Reaching deep into the drain, his fingers found the small waterproof container. Inside was a key card and a small remote control, emergency access to the house's systems that even Marlene didn't know existed. Riley activated the remote. Across the property, the irrigation system suddenly engaged, sprinklers popping up with their familiar rhythmic clicking. It wasn't part of the scheduled watering cycle, but it created both noise cover and a distraction. Through his goggles, Riley saw 2 heat signatures move toward the back of the house. Another remained stationary in what appeared to be the living room, likely Trevor. 2 others were upstairs. Riley waited until the sprinklers nearest the eastern side of the house activated, then moved. Water soaked through his tactical clothing as he sprinted toward the side entrance. A small mudroom connected to the garage. The key card deactivated the alarm for this single entry point without triggering the system's notification protocol. Inside the mudroom, Riley paused to listen. The house felt foreign now, no longer the home he had shared with his family, but an enemy stronghold. He removed his wet outer layer and boots, moving in stocking feet to minimize noise. The kitchen lay just beyond. Riley eased the door open a crack, spotting a man in tactical gear seated at the counter, monitoring a tablet. One of Wolf's team. The man's back was to Riley, his attention divided between the tablet and the commotion from the sprinklers. Riley moved like a shadow, closing the distance in 3 silent steps. His arm wrapped around the man's throat in a precise choke hold, cutting off blood flow to the brain. The guard struggled briefly before going limp. Riley dragged him into the pantry, securing him with zip ties and gagging him with kitchen towels. The tablet showed a security feed split into 6 views, including one of Trevor in the living room, still bound to the chair, but now gagged as well. The boy's eyes were alert, scanning his surroundings. Riley felt a surge of pride. Trevor wasn't paralyzed by fear. A voice crackled over the guard's radio. "Barrett, check in. What's with the sprinklers?" Riley retrieved the radio, pitching his voice to match what he'd heard from the unconscious man. "Checking the system now? Looks like a malfunction in the timer. Fix it and get back to your post. Wolf wants everything quiet until morning." "Copy that." Riley studied the security feed again. One guard was visible patrolling the back patio, peering out at the sprinklers. Another was positioned at the front entrance. Upstairs, he could make out 2 heat signatures in the master bedroom, likely Wolf and Marlene. The layout matched Riley's expectations, except for one detail. There should be 6 people in the house, but he only counted 5. Where was the 6th? A soft creak from the dining room answered his question. Riley ducked behind the kitchen island just as a beam of light swept across the room. The missing guard was checking the kitchen. "Barrett, you in here." Riley remained motionless as footsteps approached. The guard rounded the island, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and froze at the sight of Riley crouched there. Before the man could react, Riley drove his combat knife upward, the ceramic blade sliding between ribs and into the heart. Riley caught the collapsing body, easing it to the floor without sound. 2 down, 4 to go. Riley moved toward the living room, staying low and using furniture as cover. Through the doorway, he could see Trevor. Their eyes met across the room, and Riley pressed a finger to his lips. Trevor gave an almost imperceptible nod. The guard stationed at the front door had his back to the living room, attention focused outside. Riley couldn't reach him without being exposed to both the guard and potentially anyone watching the security feeds. Riley retrieved a small mirror from his tactical vest, using it to check around corners as he backtracked toward the stairs. The second floor would give him a tactical advantage and allow him to eliminate Wolf, the greatest threat, first. As he reached the bottom of the staircase, Riley heard Marlene's voice drifting down from above. "You promised no one would get hurt," she was saying, her voice strained. Trevor was never supposed to be involved. Wolf's reply came with chilling calm. "Plans change, darling. Your ex-husband has proven more resilient than expected. Sometimes leverage is necessary." "This isn't what I agreed to," Marlene insisted. "I helped you because you said it was just about recovering what he stole from you." "And it is," Wolf replied. "But Riley Blackwood took more than documents from me. He took my reputation, my career. 6 years I've spent tracking him, planning this moment. When dawn breaks, I'll have my revenge, and you'll have your freedom, and the $10 million I promised." Riley's grip tightened on his knife. The betrayal cut deeper than he had imagined. Marlene hadn't just fallen for another man. She had conspired with him, sold out her own family for money. And now it was time to collect the debt. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Riley ascended the stairs with practiced silence, each step placed with precision. The conversation between Wolf and Marlene continued, providing audible markers of their location in the master bedroom. As he reached the top of the staircase, Riley activated the thermal imaging function on his goggles again. 2 distinct heat signatures confirmed his target's positions, one seated at the window overlooking the front lawn, the other pacing near the bed. The hallway stretched before him, family photographs lining the walls, frozen moments of a life that now seemed like an elaborate cover story rather than reality. Riley passed Trevor's room, the door ajar, basketball trophies still displayed proudly on shelves. He positioned himself beside the master bedroom door, listening. "Your husband's good, I'll give him that," Wolf was saying. 15 years in the field without a single failed mission. "Do you have any idea how many people he's killed, Marlene?" "I don't want to know," she replied. "That was always our arrangement." 73. Wolf continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I've tracked every single one. High-value targets, all of them. Politicians, terrorists, businessmen, anyone the government wanted removed quietly. Your husband is the most effective assassin the program ever produced. Then why are you so confident you can beat him?" Marlene asked, her voice betraying doubt for the first time. Wolf laughed. "Because unlike his other targets, I know exactly who he is. I've studied him for years." And most importantly, Riley heard the unmistakable sound of a weapon being checked. "I have something he cares about. 2 things, actually. You said you wouldn't hurt Trevor," Marlene's voice sharpened. "And I won't, if everything goes according to plan. But Riley needs to understand the stakes. When he arrives at dawn, he'll find his son at gunpoint. He'll surrender his encryption keys, access codes to his offshore accounts, and then I'll give him a choice: quick death or watching his son die first." Marlene's sharp intake of breath told Riley everything he needed to know about her level of involvement. She had betrayed him, but she hadn't anticipated the extent of Wolf's plans. Riley checked his watch, 2:17 a.m. The emergency response to Foster's distraction would be winding down soon. He needed to move quickly. He unclipped a small canister from his belt, a prototype flashbang grenade with limited concussive effect but maximum disorientation potential. Perfect for close quarters where civilian casualties were a concern. Riley pulled the pin, kicked the door open, and tossed the grenade into the room in one fluid motion, ducking back into the hallway as it detonated with a blinding flash and ear-splitting crack. He moved into the room immediately after, weapon raised. Wolf had been knocked backwards from his seat at the window, momentarily stunned but already reaching for his sidearm. Marlene had dropped to the floor, arms covering her head. Riley kicked Wolf's hand as he grasped for his weapon, sending the gun skittering across the hardwood floor. Wolf recovered quickly, his training evident in his reflexes. He rolled away from Riley's follow-up strike, regaining his feet in a fighting stance. Earlier than I expected, Ghost, Wolf said, using Riley's operational code name. His eyes were bloodshot from the flashbang, but his focus was returning rapidly. Dawn was supposed to be our appointment. I don't like to be predictable, Riley replied, circling to keep both Wolf and Marlene in his field of vision. Wolf smiled thinly. No, you never were. That's what made you so effective. What drew me to your file in the first place? File. Riley kept his voice conversational while assessing his opponent. Wolf was younger, possibly stronger, but Riley spotted the slight favoring of his left leg, an old injury not fully healed. I was assigned to investigate certain operations. Unsanctioned killings. Assets being used for purposes beyond their mandate. Wolf's eyes flickered briefly to the hallway, a tell that Riley immediately registered. He was trying to stall, waiting for backup. Your name kept appearing in the files. And you decided to use my wife and son for revenge. Riley pressed. Business, Wolf corrected. Your wife approached me, actually, at a charity function 6 months ago. She was so proud of her government consultant husband. Started asking questions about what I did. One thing led to another. Riley glanced at Marlene, who had pulled herself to sitting position against the wall, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Tell him, Marlene, Wolf prodded. Tell your husband how eager you were to share his travel schedules, his contacts, his habits. He promised it was just information, she whispered, not meeting Riley's eyes. Corporate espionage, he said. Nothing dangerous. And the money. She trailed off. 10 million, Riley finished for her. That's your price for betraying your family. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Riley sensed rather than heard the guard approaching from behind. Without turning, he fired a single shot through the wall at chest height. A grunt of pain followed by the thud of a body hitting the floor confirmed his accuracy. Wolf used the momentary distraction to lunge forward, tackling Riley into the dresser. Family photos and toiletries crashed to the floor as the two men grappled. Wolf was indeed strong, his military training evident in his technique as he drove an elbow toward Riley's throat. Riley twisted, taking the blow on his shoulder instead. He brought his knee up sharply, connecting with Wolf's damaged left leg. The man grunted in pain but didn't relent, driving Riley backward until they crashed through the bathroom door. They separated momentarily as they regained balance in the confined space. Riley noted the sudden silence from the bedroom. Marlene had fled, potentially to release Trevor, but more likely to warn the remaining guards. You're good, Wolf acknowledged, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. But you're also older than when I studied your file. Slower. Experience compensates, Riley replied, then demonstrated by feinting left before driving a precision strike to Wolf's solar plexus. As the man doubled over, Riley smashed his elbow down between Wolf's shoulder blades, driving him to the tiled floor. Riley didn't waste the advantage, immediately transitioning to a chokehold. Wolf struggled violently, but Riley's technique was flawless, cutting off blood flow to the brain. Within seconds, Wolf went limp. Riley zip-tied the unconscious man's hands and feet, then gagged him. He had questions for Wolf, but securing Trevor came first. A shout from downstairs followed by the sound of breaking glass accelerated Riley's timeline. The remaining guards had been alerted. He retrieved his sidearm and moved quickly into the hallway, stepping over the body of the guard he'd shot through the wall. At the top of the stairs, Riley paused to assess. The security tablet he'd taken from the first guard showed Trevor still in the living room, but now Marlene was with him, frantically working to untie him. The last guard was positioned at the front entrance, weapon raised toward the stairs. Riley removed a small mirror from his tactical vest, using it to check the angle. The guard was expecting him to descend the stairs, the obvious approach. Instead, Riley moved to the laundry chute located in the hallway linen closet. Years ago, when renovating the house, he'd insisted on keeping this original feature despite Marlene's objections. She never knew he'd reinforced it specifically as an emergency escape route. The chute led directly to the basement laundry room, bypassing the first floor entirely. Riley slid feet first into the narrow passage, controlling his descent with his arms braced against the sides. He emerged in the darkened basement, landing silently on the cushioned laundry basket he'd installed for precisely this purpose. The basement had a separate entrance to the backyard, but Riley wasn't looking to escape. He moved to the electrical panel, where he disabled specific circuits, plunging the first floor into darkness while leaving the security system operational. Confused shouts from above confirmed the effectiveness of this tactic. Riley moved to the basement stairs, ascending slowly as his eyes adjusted to the darkness he had created. The guard's flashlight beam swept frantically through the living room, creating more shadows than illumination. Riley could make out Marlene hovering protectively over Trevor, the boy's restraints now removed. "Mrs. Blackwood, get back upstairs. We need to secure you until backup arrives," the guard was saying, his voice betraying his inexperience. "My son stays with me," Marlene replied firmly. This, at least, suggested she hadn't completely abandoned her maternal instincts. Riley waited until the guard's back was turned, then emerged from the basement doorway. Trevor saw him first, his eyes widening. The boy had the presence of mind not to react overtly, but Marlene followed his gaze and gasped. The guard spun toward Riley, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Two silenced shots hit center mass, and the man collapsed to the floor. For a moment, the three remaining Blackwoods stared at each other across the darkened living room, husband, wife, and son forming a triangle of complicated emotions. "Dad." Trevor broke the silence, his voice thick with relief. "Are you hurt?" Riley asked, moving quickly to his son's side, eyes never leaving Marlene. "Just bruises," Trevor assured him. "They roughed me up a bit when they first arrived, but mostly they just kept me tied up." Riley examined his son's face in the dim light. The boy had his mother's eyes, but Riley's jaw, stubborn, determined. Despite the circumstances, pride swelled in Riley's chest. Trevor had kept his head, used their emergency codes, and survived. "Wolf?" Marlene asked, her voice small. "Restrained. Upstairs." Riley's tone was clipped as he checked Trevor for hidden injuries. "3 of his men are down. How many more are coming?" Marlene hesitated. "2 more. They're stationed nearby, some kind of backup team. Wolf calls them every 3 hours. When is the next check-in?" "4 a.m., she answered. Riley checked his watch. 2:38 a.m. Just over an hour to secure the house, extract what information he needed from Wolf, and prepare for the next wave. "Trevor, I need you to go to the panic room," Riley said, helping his son to his feet. "I want to help," Trevor protested. "You already have," Riley assured him. "But what's coming next isn't something you should see." Trevor studied his father's face, then nodded reluctantly. "What about Mom?" Both turned to Marlene, who stood trembling by the sofa. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know what he really wanted. I thought it was just information, corporate secrets for his security company. The divorce was real, Riley. We were broken long before Damon appeared." "And the money?" Riley asked coldly. Marlene flinched. "He said it was just business intelligence, worth millions to his clients." "Go with Trevor to the panic room," Riley decided. "We'll sort out your involvement later." As Trevor led his mother toward the hidden room behind the basement wine cellar, he looked back at his father. "Dad, make them pay. All of them." Riley nodded grimly. "Count on it." Chapter 5, The Revelation. The master bedroom had transformed into an impromptu interrogation chamber. Wolf sat zip-tied to a chair, his earlier confidence eroded but not extinguished. Blood from the cut above his eye had dried in a dark streak down his face. Riley had searched him thoroughly, finding 3 concealed weapons, a satellite phone, and a small data drive. "You're making a mistake, Blackwood," Wolf said as Riley examined the data drive. "This goes higher than you think." "Enlighten me," Riley replied, connecting the drive to a secure tablet. The files were encrypted, but Riley had anticipated this and was already running decryption software. "Your wife sold you out for 10 million, Wolf said. "But I'm offering you 20 to walk away right now. Take your son, disappear. I only need what's in your head." Riley continued working on the encryption, his expression neutral. "You orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving my ex-wife, threatened my son, and planned to execute me on my own lawn. Now you're offering money. Your negotiation strategy needs work." Wolf leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed. "It was never personal." "Well, not entirely. Your Yemen operation went sideways. You killed the wrong target." This caught Riley's attention. "Yemen? I was never in Yemen. Not you personally. Your intel. Your network. 3 years ago, a USB drive containing the identities of deep cover assets in the Middle East was transported to a buyer in Sana'a. You provided the dossier that led to the hit on the courier. Riley's mind raced back. 3 years ago, he had indeed provided intelligence on an arms dealer operating in Yemen, but the operation had been straightforward: eliminate the target, recover the weapons manifest. Nothing about deep cover assets. The courier was my brother, Wolf continued, his voice dropping. Twin brother. Michael Wolf. Undercover CIA for 7 years in the region. He wasn't an arms dealer. He was tracking them, infiltrating their networks. If that's true, why come after me? I provided intelligence, not the kill order. Because you're the only one still alive who knows who gave the order, Wolf said. Everyone else connected to that operation has suffered unfortunate accidents over the past 3 years. You're the last link. The decryption program finished its work, and Riley scrolled through the revealed files. Personnel records, operation reports, death certificates, all connected to a single operation codenamed Chimera. 20 million, Wolf repeated, plus new identities for you and your son. All I need are the names of your handlers for the Yemen operation. Riley studied the man before him. Wolf was playing an angle, but was revenge for his brother really his motivation? The files painted a more complex picture. According to these records, the Yemen operation had been designated Chimera and run through a shell division that didn't officially exist. Funding had been routed through private contractors, authorizations signed by officials who were now dead. A systematic cleanup operation. Your brother wasn't the target, Riley realized aloud. He was collateral damage in something bigger. These records show 8 other deep cover operatives terminated during the same week. Wolf's expression confirmed Riley's suspicion. Now you're beginning to understand. Someone wanted all those assets eliminated, and your intel was the tool they used. I've spent 3 years working my way backward through the chain of command. Riley connected more dots. And you think I know who authorized it? I know you do, Wolf insisted. Your encryption keys will unlock the final piece. The authorization for Chimera came from somewhere, and that somewhere is above any pay grade you or I ever had. The satellite phone on the dresser buzzed. Wolf's backup team, checking in early. Riley ignored it, focusing on a particular file that had just decoded. You didn't seduce my wife just to get to me, Riley said slowly. You needed her because of this. He held up the tablet, displaying a property deed, not for their current house, but for a cabin in the Poconos that Marlene had inherited from her parents. A cabin Riley had only visited twice. Clever, Wolf admitted, but not quite right. I needed both of you. The cabin contains a safe that requires dual biometric authentication, your handprint and Marlene's. Inside that safe is the evidence that will bring down the people who had my brother killed. Evidence I supposedly put there? Riley asked skeptically. Insurance, Wolf explained. Every top-level operative creates a dead man's switch. I know you have one. Records that would expose operations if anything happened to you. According to my intelligence, you hid yours at the cabin after the Yemen operation went bad. Riley maintained his poker face, but internally, his mind raced. Wolf was partially right. Riley did maintain insurance files. It was standard procedure for someone in his position. But they weren't at the cabin. The cabin safe contained something else entirely, something only he and Lewis knew about. The satellite phone buzzed again, more insistently. Wolf glanced at it nervously. Your backup team is getting anxious, Riley observed. They have orders to storm the house if I don't respond, Wolf warned. 2 former Delta operators. You're good, but even you can't take them both while protecting your family. Riley weighed his options. The files on the tablet suggested Wolf might be telling at least partial truths about a high-level cleanup operation. But trusting the man who had threatened his son was out of the question. Here's what's going to happen, Riley decided. You're going to call your team and tell them everything is proceeding as planned. Then you, me, and Marlene are going to take a trip to the cabin. If what you say is true, we'll find these records and I'll consider our next steps. And if I refuse? Wolf asked. Riley's expression hardened. Then I call my own backup, and this house becomes your tomb. Your choice. Wolf studied Riley's face, then nodded slowly. I've hunted you for 3 years, Blackwood. I know you well enough to recognize when you're not bluffing. Make the call. Riley held the satellite phone to Wolf's ear, finger on the disconnect button in case Wolf attempted to alert his team with code words. Status normal, Wolf said when his man answered. Proceed with surveillance only. Target expected at dawn. Copy that, came the reply. Perimeter secure. Riley ended the call, then turned his attention back to the files. Something still didn't add up. If Wolf had truly been investigating his brother's death for 3 years, why involve Marlene now? Why not approach Riley directly with his evidence? As if reading his thoughts, Wolf spoke again. Your handler, Lewis. He's part of it. Any direct approach to you would have alerted him. I needed to work through channels he wouldn't monitor. Marlene, Riley murmured. She was surprisingly easy to manipulate, Wolf admitted. Lonely, bitter about your absences, curious about the mysterious man her husband really was. I didn't even have to lie about much, just my motivations. The pieces were falling into place, but Riley still sensed deception. He needed to verify independently. Using his secure phone, he sent an encrypted message to a contact outside his normal chain of command, requesting confirmation on Operation Chimera. While waiting for a response, Riley retrieved Marlene from the panic room, leaving Trevor secured inside. The boy had protested, but Riley had been firm. Whatever happened next, Trevor needed to remain safe. Marlene entered the bedroom and froze at the sight of Wolf bound to the chair. Is he? Very much alive, Riley assured her coldly. And he's been sharing interesting stories about your relationship. Color drained from Marlene's face. Riley, I swear I didn't know what he was really after. He said he was a corporate security consultant, that you had information valuable to his clients. And you believe that? Riley challenged. After 15 years of marriage to me, you thought I was harboring corporate secrets? What was I supposed to think? She shot back, finding her voice. You were gone more than you were home. When you were here, you were distant, distracted. I knew your government consulting was a cover for something. Was it so hard to believe you might be selling information on the side? Riley's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message. The response about Chimera was brief but definitive. Operation confirmed. Classified level UMBRA. All assets terminated. Final authorization, Lewis. Riley's blood ran cold. Lewis, his handler for 12 years. The man who had assigned his missions, provided his intelligence, protected his identity. If Lewis had authorized the Yemen operation, then everything Wolf had said gained credibility. We're going to the cabin, Riley announced, making his decision. All 3 of us. Now, what about Trevor? Marlene asked. The panic room is secure. Food, water, communications, everything he needs for 72 hours if necessary. He stays there until I know exactly what we're dealing with. Riley cut Wolf's zip ties, but kept the man's hands cuffed in front of him. One wrong move, and I finish what I should have done the moment I walked in. Wolf rubbed his wrists where the plastic had cut into his skin. You won't regret this, Blackwood. When you see what's in that safe, you'll understand everything. As they prepared to leave, Riley used the house security system to monitor the perimeter. True to Wolf's word, 2 men in tactical gear were positioned in vehicles near the property, one at each end of the street. They would need to be dealt with. Riley outlined his plan quickly. They would exit through the basement tunnel that led to the neighbor's tool shed, another security feature Marlene had never known about. From there, they would use the neighbor's car. Riley had a key for emergencies to bypass Wolf's surveillance team. As Riley gathered final supplies, Marlene approached him hesitantly. I know you'll never forgive me, she said quietly. But everything I did, I thought I was just finally learning the truth about my husband. Riley regarded her with eyes that had grown colder by the hour. When this is over, we'll discuss exactly what you've done. But understand this, the only reason you're still breathing is because Trevor loves you. The 3 made their way through the basement tunnel, emerging into the cool night air behind the neighbor's property. The escape went smoothly. Too smoothly, a part of Riley's mind warned. Wolf seemed too cooperative, Marlene too contrite. As they drove toward the Pennsylvania border, Riley maintained vigilant awareness of their surroundings while his mind processed the implications of Lewis's betrayal. If his handler had orchestrated the elimination of deep cover assets, the conspiracy reached to the highest levels of government. The cabin was 3 hours away, 3 hours to plan his next move in a game where all the rules had suddenly changed. Chapter 6. The Deceit. Dawn broke over the Pocono Mountains as Riley navigated the final stretch of winding road toward Marlene's family cabin. The property sat on 5 isolated acres, bordered by state forest land on 2 sides and a small lake on another. Privacy had been the primary reason Riley had originally approved of keeping the cabin when Marlene inherited it. though he'd visited rarely due to his work schedule. Turn left at the fork, Marlene directed from the passenger seat. Wolf sat silently in the back, his handcuffed wrists resting in his lap. Throughout the drive, Riley had maintained careful surveillance for any signs of pursuit, but the roads had remained empty. Too empty, perhaps. Riley's instincts, honed through years of field operations, sensed a wrongness to the situation, though he couldn't precisely identify its source. The cabin came into view, a two-story structure of weathered cedar with a wraparound porch. Solar panels on the roof were a recent addition, one of Marlene's projects during the separation. Riley noted security cameras installed at strategic points around the property, also new since his last visit. Your improvements? Riley asked Marlene, nodding toward a camera as they pulled into the gravel driveway. She hesitated before answering. Damon suggested them. For safety. Riley exchanged a glance with Wolf in the rearview mirror. The man's expression revealed nothing. Who monitors the feeds? Riley asked. Private security company, Wolf answered. But they only check if an alarm is triggered. Riley parked near the front steps, but left the engine running. Wait here, he instructed, then conducted a perimeter check of the property, moving with practiced efficiency despite his fatigue. The cabin appeared secure, no signs of recent entry, no unexpected vehicles hidden nearby. Yet Riley couldn't shake his sense of unease. He returned to the car and gestured for the others to exit. Where's the safe? He asked Marlene as they entered the cabin. Master bedroom closet, she replied. Behind the cedar panel. Riley led the way upstairs, keeping Wolf in front of him. The cabin's interior was rustic but comfortable. Knotty pine walls, stone fireplace, simple furniture. Marlene had maintained it well, though it showed little evidence of frequent use. The master bedroom remained as Riley remembered. Queen bed facing windows that overlooked the lake, antique dresser against one wall, handmade quilt in earth tones. The walk-in closet was mostly empty now, with just a few of Marlene's seasonal clothes hanging. There, she pointed to the back panel. It requires both our handprints, placed simultaneously on the sensors. Riley studied the wooden panel. It appeared solid and ordinary, but when he ran his fingers along the edge, he detected a slight seam. How do we activate it? Press here, Marlene demonstrated, touching a knot in the wood that didn't match the others. The panel slid aside silently, revealing a modern biometric safe embedded in the wall. Two handprint scanners glowed with soft blue light. Right hand for you, left for me, Marlene explained. Riley hesitated, his tactical instincts screaming caution. What's in the safe, exactly? He asked Wolf. Insurance files, Wolf replied. Data you collected on Operation Chimera. Records of authorizations, target lists, operational reports. Everything that would expose who really ordered the Yemen mission. And how do you know these files are here? Riley pressed. Wolf's eyes flickered to Marlene momentarily, a tell that Riley immediately cataloged. Intelligence gathering. Your handler Lewis has been searching for these files for 3 years. The cabin was on his list of possible locations. Riley turned to Marlene. When was the last time you opened this safe? She shook her head. I never have. You installed it 2 years ago, said it was for emergency documents. I assumed it contained passports, cash, escape plan materials. This matched Riley's recollection. He had indeed installed the safe, but not for the purpose Wolf described. The safe contained alternate identities, emergency funds, and weapons, standard contingency materials for someone in his profession. Nothing about Operation Chimera or Yemen. Something's not right, Riley murmured. He turned back to Wolf. If I never stored those files here, why are you so certain they exist? Before Wolf could answer, Riley's secure phone vibrated. A message from his independent contact, Lewis compromised. Terminate all contact. Seek extraction. In that moment of distraction, everything changed. Wolf moved with unexpected speed despite his restraints, driving his shoulder into Riley's midsection while simultaneously sweeping his legs. As Riley staggered backward, Marlene grabbed a concealed taser from the closet shelf and pressed it against Riley's neck. The electrical current locked his muscles, sending him crashing to the floor as pain coursed through his body. Through narrowed eyes, he watched Wolf extract a hidden key from his boot and unlock his handcuffs. Sorry it came to this, Ghost, Wolf said, rubbing his wrists. But we needed you to lead us to the safe. Your wife wasn't entirely certain of its location. As the paralyzing effects of the taser began to fade, Riley fought to regain control of his limbs. "You're working with Lewis," he managed through gritted teeth. Wolf smiled thinly. "Not exactly. Lewis works for the same people I do. The Yemen operation wasn't a mistake. It was phase one of a larger initiative. Your intelligence was perfect, as always. Those deep cover agents weren't loyal CIA assets. They were compromised, selling secrets to the highest bidder." "Including your brother?" Riley challenged. "I don't have a brother," Wolf replied coldly. "That was a convenient fiction to gain your cooperation. The truth is simpler. You know too much, and more importantly, you have access to accounts we need." Marlene retrieved zip ties from her pocket and secured Riley's hands behind his back. Her movements were practiced, confident, not the actions of a manipulated civilian. "You were never manipulated," Riley said to her, the final piece clicking into place. "You're part of this." "Not initially," she admitted, avoiding his eyes. "But when Damon approached me 9 months ago, he offered more than money. He offered answers about who you really were, what you really did all those years. And revenge," Wolf added. "Don't forget that part, darling. Your husband's work took him away from his family constantly. Missed birthdays, anniversaries, school events. Marlene deserved better." Riley's tactical mind was already calculating scenarios, assessing weaknesses, planning countermoves. But first, he needed information. "If this isn't about Yemen, what do you really want?" Wolf gestured toward the safe. "Your final operation, the Russian oil magnate in Moscow. That wasn't just an assassination. It was an asset acquisition. Before he died, he transferred control of certain financial instruments to a numeric code. That code was transmitted to your secure account." Riley maintained his poker face, but internally, pieces were falling into place. The Moscow operation had indeed involved a data transfer, a string of numbers delivered by the target moments before Riley eliminated him. According to his briefing, those numbers were encryption keys for intelligence the Russian had been selling. $3 billion, Wolf continued. Currently locked in cryptocurrency wallets that only your biometric signature can access. The safe contains the backup authentication methods, retinal scan records, fingerprint templates, voice pattern analyses. Lewis planned for contingencies. "Lewis," Riley repeated, buying time as he worked at the zip ties binding his wrists. "My handler set me up." "Lewis identified you as a loose end," Wolf corrected. "All the other operatives involved in Moscow have been eliminated. You're the last one standing, the final connection that could expose what really happened." "And Trevor?" Riley asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Where does my son fit into this?" A flicker of genuine emotion crossed Marlene's face. "Trevor was never supposed to be involved. The original plan was clean. You would return from Moscow, we would complete the divorce, and you would disappear in an unfortunate accident. But you complicated things by retiring early," Wolf added. "The timeline had to be accelerated. Trevor became leverage." Riley had nearly worked one hand free from the restraints, careful to keep his movements imperceptible. "There's a problem with your plan," he said conversationally. "I never stored biometric data in this safe. It contains emergency cash, passports, weapons, nothing else." Doubt flashed across Wolf's face. Lewis was certain. "Lewis was wrong," Riley interrupted. "The biometric data is stored at a secure facility in Geneva, accessible only in person, with triple authentication." This was a lie, but Riley needed to buy time. The data from Moscow was stored in an even more secure location, his own memory. The numeric code had never been written down or recorded in any way. Marlene turned to Wolf. Could he be telling the truth? Lewis seemed very certain about the safe. "There's one way to find out," Wolf decided. He grabbed Riley by the collar, dragging him to his feet and pushing him toward the safe. "Open it. You and Marlene, together." Riley calculated his odds. The moment the safe opened, Wolf would discover his deception. But refusing would only lead to more drastic persuasion methods. The safe itself offered a potential advantage. It contained a Glock 26 with 2 magazines. If he could create a distraction at the right moment. "Fine," Riley conceded. "But you won't find what you're looking for." He positioned his right hand over the scanner while Marlene placed her left hand on the adjacent panel. Blue light swept beneath their palms, followed by a soft click as the safe mechanism disengaged. Riley acted instantly. As the safe door swung open, He drove his elbow backward into Wolf's solar plexus, simultaneously sweeping Marlene's legs from under her. In the same fluid motion, he grabbed the Glock from its compartment and rolled away from the closet. Wolf recovered quickly, drawing his own weapon, but Riley had already positioned himself behind the solid oak dresser. 2 shots splintered the wood near his head as Riley assessed his situation. The bedroom had 2 exits, the main door leading to the hallway, and a glass door opening onto a small balcony. Wolf had positioned himself to cover the main door, while Marlene had taken cover in the bathroom. "You're outnumbered and surrounded, Blackwood," Wolf called. "Lewis has a team en route. You have nowhere to go." "Lewis is about to have a more immediate problem," Riley replied calmly, firing 3 precise shots through the wall where he had calculated Wolf was standing. A grunt of pain confirmed at least 1 hit. Riley used the moment to move toward the balcony door, staying low. "Damon," Marlene cried from the bathroom. "I'm hit," Wolf growled. "Shoulder. Nothing critical." Riley reached the balcony door and eased it open. The drop to the ground was about 20 feet, manageable with proper technique. As he prepared to move, his secure phone vibrated again. He checked it while maintaining his position. The message contained a single line: "Chimera assets rogue. Lewis disavowed. Ghost Protocol authorized." Ghost Protocol, the highest level emergency procedure, authorizing an operative to eliminate all threats with no restrictions or oversight. It was a directive Riley had never expected to receive. The message clarified the true situation. Lewis had gone rogue, using the Moscow operation as cover to steal billions. Wolf and Marlene were his accomplices, not official agents. This changed everything. Riley was no longer a loose and being eliminated by his own government. He was an authorized agent taking down traitors. Through the balcony door, Riley caught a glimpse of movement in the trees at the edge of the property. Tactical team, moving into position. Lewis's backup, most likely. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. Riley made a decision. He fired the remaining rounds in his magazine through the bedroom wall in a sweeping pattern, forcing Wolf and Marlene to take cover, then launched himself over the balcony railing. He absorbed the impact with a practiced roll, coming up in a crouch behind a large pine tree. From his new position, Riley had a clear view of the tactical team approaching the cabin, 4 men in full gear, moving with military precision. Not amateurs, but not top-tier operators either. Mercenaries, most likely. Riley checked the Glock spare magazine, full. 15 rounds against 4 trained operators, Wolf and Marlene. Not ideal odds, but he'd faced worse. More importantly, he now understood the full scope of the betrayal. His wife hadn't just fallen for another man. She had been part of a conspiracy to steal billions and eliminate anyone who could expose the theft. And they had used his son as leverage. Riley chambered around and settled into the cold, focused state that had earned him the nickname Ghost. Wolf and Marlene had made a critical miscalculation when they threatened Trevor. Now they would pay the price. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and approaching rain as Riley moved silently through the underbrush surrounding the cabin. He had circled to the eastern perimeter, placing himself between the tactical team and their most likely extraction route. Years of operational experience had taught him to control the battlefield whenever possible, and this terrain offered advantages to someone with his skill set. From his concealed position, Riley observed the 4-man team as they established a perimeter around the cabin. Their gear was high-end but mismatched, further evidence they were mercenaries rather than official operators. 2 positioned themselves at the front entrance while 2 circled toward the rear deck. Their communications discipline was reasonably good, but Riley caught fragments of their exchanges through their subvocal microphones. Upper level, east side. Subject is armed. Priority is the package. The package was almost certainly the supposed biometric data, the key to the Moscow operation's hidden fortune. Riley needed to know more about the full scope of the betrayal, which meant he needed one of these men alive for questioning. Riley identified his first target, the operator who had separated slightly from his partner to check the tool shed adjacent to the cabin. Moving with deliberate silence, Riley closed the distance using the natural cover of the forest. As the mercenary bent to examine the shed's padlock, Riley struck. His hand clamped over the man's mouth, while his other arm applied precise pressure to the carotid artery. The operator struggled briefly before losing consciousness. Riley dragged him deeper into the woods, securing him with the man's own zip ties and relieving him of his weapons and communications equipment. The tactical radio crackled to life. "Jackson, check in." Riley mimicked the unconscious man's voice pattern, a skill honed through years of fieldcraft. "Shed clear. Checking the perimeter." "Copy. Maintain position. Primary team is moving to extract the HVT. High-value target. That would be Wolf, most likely." Riley checked the mercenaries' equipment. 416 Hong Kong dollars carbine with suppressor, Glock 19 sidearm, 3 fragmentation grenades, tactical knife, and a small medical kit. Significantly better than the single pistol Riley had escaped with. Movement at the cabin's rear entrance caught Riley's attention. Wolf emerged onto the deck, his shoulder hastily bandaged, with Marlene close behind. 3 mercenaries formed a protective triangle around them as they moved toward the tree line, heading directly for Riley's position. Riley evaluated his options. Direct confrontation would be high risk, 4 armed opponents, with Marlene potentially joining the fight. A more strategic approach was required. He removed one of the fragmentation grenades from the unconscious mercenary's vest, then used the tactical radio again. "Movement in the northeast sector," he reported, disguising his voice. "Possible hostile approaching your position." "Copy, moving to intercept," came the reply. As anticipated, the lead mercenary signaled for the team to split. 2 remaining with Wolf and Marlene, while 2 moved to investigate the supposed threat. This reduced the odds to a more manageable level. Riley pulled the pin on the grenade, holding the spoon firmly as he calculated his timing. When the 2 mercenaries were approximately 15 meters from Wolf's position, Riley released the spoon, counted silently to 2, then threw the grenade into the space between the groups. The explosion sent dirt and debris skyward, the concussive force momentarily disorienting everyone in the vicinity. Riley was already moving before the dust began to settle, using the 416 Hong Kong dollars to neutralize the 2 mercenaries nearest Wolf with precise double taps to center mass. Wolf recovered quickly, shoving Marlene toward the trees as he drew his sidearm. Riley anticipated the move, shifting position and firing a controlled burst that caught Wolf in the leg. The man collapsed with a cry of pain, but continued firing in Riley's direction. The remaining mercenaries had regrouped and were advancing on Riley's position, using tactical movement to provide covering fire for each other. Riley used their predictable pattern against them, waiting for the first to begin his move before emerging from cover at an unexpected angle. 2 quick shots dropped the man, but Riley had to immediately dive back into cover as the second mercenary unleashed a barrage from his automatic weapon. Bullets splintered the tree Riley had sheltered behind, showering him with wood fragments. He crawled rapidly toward a boulder 5 meters away, staying below the mercenary's line of fire. "He's moving right," Marlene shouted, her intimate knowledge of Riley's tactical thinking now being used against him. "Cut him off at the clearing." Riley changed direction instantly, reversing course and circling back toward where the mercenary had been. The man, following Marlene's guidance, had moved to cover the clearing, leaving his flank exposed. Riley emerged silently behind him, combat knife drawn. One swift movement across the throat, and the 4th mercenary dropped to the forest floor. Marlene's warning cry alerted Wolf to Riley's approach. Despite his injured leg, Wolf managed to drag himself behind a fallen log, firing wildly in Riley's direction. "It's over, Damon," Riley called, moving to flank Wolf's position. "Lewis has been disavowed. Ghost protocol has been authorized." "You're lying," Wolf snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Lewis controls the entire operation." "Lewis is a traitor," Riley replied, continuing to circle toward Wolf's blind spot. "The agency knows everything about Moscow. About the money. About you." Riley could see Marlene now, crouched beside a large oak tree 30 meters away. She still had the taser, but at this distance, it was useless. Her eyes darted between Riley and the forest path behind her, calculating her chances of escape. "Even if that's true," Wolf called, "you'll never prove Marlene's involvement. It'll be your word against hers, the bitter ex-husband versus the innocent wife. Who do you think people will believe?" "You're assuming I care about legal proceedings," Riley replied coldly, now positioned behind Wolf's cover. "Ghost protocol isn't about arrests, Damon. It's about elimination of threats. Riley stepped into view, rifle trained on Wolf's head. The man froze, his own weapon aimed uselessly in the wrong direction. "Riley, please," Marlene called desperately. "I'm Trevor's mother. You can't. Don't speak his name." Riley cut her off, his voice deadly quiet. "You used our son as bait. You were willing to let Wolf's men threaten him, traumatize him, for money." "It wasn't like that," she protested. "Trevor was never supposed to be hurt. They were just supposed to scare him enough to make the call convincing." "The call," Riley repeated, pieces clicking into place. "The code phrases. How did you know about those?" Marlene looked away. "I overheard you teaching them to Trevor years ago. I wrote them down, just in case." Riley turned his attention back to Wolf, who was attempting to stem the bleeding from his leg wound. "The Moscow operation. How much do you actually know?" "Enough," Wolf grimaced. "The oil magnate was laundering money for both Russian intelligence and your agency. $3 billion in cryptocurrency, untraceable. Lewis saw an opportunity. And you recruited my wife to help access my security protocols," Riley finished. She was eager to help. Wolf smiled thinly, despite his pain. All those years of wondering who her husband really was, who you killed, who you worked for. I barely had to persuade her. Riley glanced at Marlene, who had begun inching toward the forest path while the men talked. "Don't," he warned her. She froze. "What happens now, Ghost?" Wolf asked. "You kill us both? Return to your handlers like a good dog? The money's still out there, waiting to be claimed." "I don't care about the money," Riley replied. "I care about my son, and making sure no one ever threatens him again." Movement in the underbrush caught Riley's attention, slight but unmistakable. Someone else was approaching. Lewis, most likely, coming to check why his team had gone silent. Riley made his decision. He fired a single shot into Wolf's uninjured leg, causing the man to howl in pain. "That's to keep you from following," Riley told him, then turned to Marlene. "Both of you are going to answer for what you've done, but not by my hand." He retrieved zip ties from one of the fallen mercenaries and secured Wolf's hands. "The authorities will be here within the hour. They'll find evidence of your conspiracy, including the recorded conversations I've been capturing since we left the house." Wolf's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in calculation. "You're bluffing." Riley removed a small device from his tactical vest, a digital recorder that had been operating since their confrontation in the master bedroom. He placed it on the ground between them. "Everything you need to know about Moscow is on this recording," Riley told him, "including the parts about Trevor. When Lewis arrives, he'll want to eliminate both of you as loose ends. Your only chance for survival is to play this for him. Convince him you have copies stored safely away." Marlene stared at him in confusion. "You're helping us?" "No," Riley said flatly. "I'm ensuring Lewis knows exactly who betrayed him before he decides what to do with you. This is between the three of you now." The underbrush rustled again, closer this time. Riley needed to move. "One final thing," he said, leaning close to Wolf. "If anything happens to my son, if he so much as has a nightmare about this, I will return. And there will be no recording, no warning, no chance to surrender. Just darkness. Do you understand?" The cold certainty in Riley's voice sent a visible shiver through both Wolf and Marlene. They nodded silently. Riley melted into the forest just as Lewis emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. The last thing Riley heard was Lewis's enraged shout as he discovered his wounded conspirators and fallen team. It was time to collect Trevor and disappear. Riley had already mentally activated one of his emergency protocols. New identities, new location, completely disconnected from his former life. The cabin safe contained everything they would need to start over. As he navigated the forest back toward the road where he had concealed a secondary vehicle, Riley reflected on the bitter irony. His career as the Ghost had cost him his marriage. Now it would save his son. Marlene had made her choice. Now she would live with the consequences. Chapter 8. The Escape. The storm that had been threatening all morning finally broke as Riley reached the concealed vehicle. A nondescript Ford SUV he'd purchased through untraceable channels years earlier and hidden at a long-term storage facility near the cabin. He'd maintained 4 such vehicles across the country, part of his personal contingency planning that had always seemed excessive until now. Rain hammered against the windshield as Riley drove back toward Baltimore, taking secondary roads to avoid potential surveillance. The secure phone Lewis had provided was now a liability, Riley removed its battery and SIM card, crushing both before discarding the pieces at separate locations along the route. His mind worked methodically through the immediate challenges. Trevor was still in the panic room at the house, which had supplies for 72 hours. The room's communication system was hardened against electronic interference, but it connected to a secure server that Lewis potentially had access to. Riley needed to extract his son before Lewis could regroup and deploy additional assets. The most direct approach would be to return home immediately, but that location would be under surveillance by now. Riley needed a different strategy, one that used Lewis's procedures against him. Standard protocol for a compromised safe house dictated surveillance, but not immediate entry unless the target appeared. Lewis would be monitoring the property remotely, waiting for Riley to return for Trevor. With Wolf and Marlene now wild cards in his operation, Lewis would be stretched thin, forced to divide his attention and resources. Riley pulled into a truck stop outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and accessed the emergency kit stored in the SUV's hidden compartment. The kit contained burner phones, cash, a 9mm Beretta with suppressor, and various identity documents. He activated one of the phones and dialed a number from memory. Montgomery residence. Answered a crisp female voice. Authorization code Victor Echo 97 Tango, Riley responded. A pause, then, authentication confirmed. Secure line established. How may we assist, operative? I need a distraction at the following coordinates. Riley provided his home address. Police response, substantial enough to draw attention, but not a full tactical team. Timeline, 90 minutes. Acknowledged. Resources deploying. Additional requirements. Local news coverage if possible. Something that would evacuate neighboring properties. Understood. Gas leak scenario prepared. Anything else? Riley considered his next moves carefully. I need a safe house in Sector 7 with regional transport options. Immediate availability, 2 occupants. Confirmed. Details will be transmitted to this device in 15 minutes. Will you require medical support? Negative, Riley replied. But I need clean communications. The primary channels are compromised. New protocols will be included with safe house details. Good hunting, operative. Riley ended the call, knowing the Montgomery residence, a cover designation for an independent contractor group that serviced multiple agencies, would deliver precisely what he requested. They operated outside the official channels that Lewis could monitor or influence. With the immediate logistics arranged, Riley turned his attention to the longer-term strategy. The Moscow operation had clearly been more significant than he'd realized. $3 billion in cryptocurrency would attract attention from multiple interested parties, not just Lewis and his conspirators. Riley needed to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. He activated another burner phone and made a call to his most trusted independent contact, a former operative who had left the agency to work in private intelligence. Mason, a gravelly voice answered on the third ring. It's Blackwood. I need information on an operation codenamed Chimera, particularly its connection to a recent Moscow assignment. A long pause. Blackwood, that's radioactive territory. Word is you've gone rogue. The opposite, Riley corrected. Lewis is the one who's compromised. I'm operating under Ghost Protocol authorization. Another pause. Can you verify? Check the emergency channels. Authorization code Broken Arrow 649 Echo Delta. The sound of typing came through the connection. Confirmed, Mason finally said, his tone shifting to business-like efficiency. What do you need to know? Everything about Chimera and the Moscow connection. Particularly any intelligence on a cryptocurrency transfer worth approximately $3 billion. Jesus, Mason muttered. That explains it. The chatter has been intense for the past 48 hours. Multiple agencies circling, private operators mobilizing. Whatever happened in Moscow set off a feeding frenzy. Focus, Mason. What do you know specifically? The target in Moscow, Kirovsky, was running a shadow banking operation for at least 3 intelligence services, including our own. The $3 billion wasn't just money, it was leverage. Account numbers, transaction histories, blackmail material on high-level government officials worldwide. Whoever controls that data controls people who make policy decisions. Riley processed this information. Lewis was assigned to secure this intelligence. Lewis was assigned to destroy it, Mason corrected. Too toxic for anyone to possess. But obviously, he had other ideas. Who else is involved? How high does this go? That's the thing, Mason replied, his voice dropping. Lewis appears to be operating independently. His direct superior, Director Hawthorne, initiated the ghost protocol against him when the Moscow package wasn't confirmed destroyed. There's a full sanction order out on Lewis now. This aligned with the message Riley had received earlier. What about Damon Wolf? Former SAD, reportedly killed in Yemen 6 years ago. Mason whistled low. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Wolf was presumed dead, but there were always rumors he had gone private. High-end mercenary work, mostly. If he's working with Lewis, that's a dangerous combination. And my family? Riley asked, the question he'd been avoiding. How are they connected to official records? Silence stretched for several seconds. I can't access those files remotely, Blackwood. But I can tell you there's been unusual activity associated with your home address in the past 24 hours. Multiple queries from different agencies. Riley had expected as much. I need one more thing. Can you still access the Odin system? Odin, the Operational Data Integration Network, was the agency's most comprehensive intelligence database, theoretically isolated from external networks. Limited access, Mason admitted. What are you looking for? Run a cross-reference. Marlene Blackwood and all operations I've been involved with in the past 5 years. Look for any connection, however tenuous. The typing resumed, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Riley, you need to see this for yourself. I'm sending an encrypted file to this device. Delete it after viewing. The phone buzzed with an incoming transmission. Riley opened the file, a redacted operational report dated 18 months earlier, during a period when he and Marlene had still been together, though their marriage was already strained. As he read through the document, cold fury built within him. According to the report, Marlene had been approached by a foreign intelligence service attempting to gain information about Riley's work. She had reported the contact to a handler, not Riley's handler, but a separate agency division. The report indicated she had been briefly considered as a potential asset for counterintelligence operations. The final page included a recommendation. Subject deemed unsuitable for operational use due to emotional instability and financial concerns. Monitoring to continue through passive measures only. The agency had been watching his wife, had known she was vulnerable, and had done nothing to warn him. Blackwood, you still there? Mason's voice pulled him back to the present. I'm here, Riley replied, his voice controlled despite the rage burning within him. One last question. Is Trevor Blackwood in any agency database? Not that I can find, Mason assured him. Your compartmentalization protocols appear to have been effective. As far as official records show, your son has no connection to your operational activities. Small comfort, but Riley would take it. Thanks, Mason. Purge this conversation from your systems. Already done. Blackwood, watch your back. This isn't just about money anymore. It never was, Riley replied, ending the call. The phone chimed with incoming details from the Montgomery residence, safe house location, access codes, and new communication protocols. Everything was in place for the next phase of his plan. Riley started the SUV and pulled back onto the road, his course set for Baltimore. The storm had intensified, sheets of rain reducing visibility and keeping other traffic to a minimum, ideal conditions for what came next. As he drove, Riley mentally reviewed what he now knew. Lewis had betrayed the agency, attempting to steal intelligence and cryptocurrency worth billions. Wolf had been his partner, using Marlene to gain access to Riley's security protocols. And Marlene had been flagged as a security risk 18 months ago, her vulnerability noted but not addressed. The agency had failed him. His wife had betrayed him. Only Trevor remained untainted by the corruption that had destroyed the life Riley had struggled to build. 90 minutes later, Riley approached his neighborhood from the Western Access Road, parking 3 blocks away in a hospital visitor lot. Police vehicles and fire trucks surrounded his street, their emergency lights pulsing through the continuing downpour. Neighbors stood under umbrellas on the sidewalk, watching as utility workers examined what appeared to be a ruptured gas main. The Montgomery residents had delivered exactly as promised, a controlled emergency scenario that would keep authorities focused on public safety rather than surveillance. The chaos provided perfect cover for Riley's approach. He circled behind the adjacent properties, using the continuing storm as concealment. The basement entrance to the panic room was accessible through the garden shed, a route that bypassed the main house entirely. Riley reached the shed without incident, entering through a concealed panel in the floor. The narrow tunnel beyond led directly to the panic room's secondary exit, a feature he had insisted on during installation. At the reinforced door, Riley entered the access code and submitted to the biometric scan. The heavy door swung open to reveal Trevor sitting on the cot, a baseball bat gripped tightly in his hands. The boy's eyes widened in recognition, then relief. "Dad." Trevor dropped the bat and rushed forward. Riley embraced his son briefly but firmly. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Trevor assured him. "What's happening outside?" The monitors showed police everywhere. "Gas leak, a distraction I arranged." "We need to move quickly," Riley explained, already gathering the emergency supplies he had stored in the panic room. "We can't stay here. It's not safe." Trevor nodded, immediately shifting to the focused state Riley had trained him for during their emergency preparedness drills over the years. The boy had always assumed those drills were his father's military background showing through. He had no idea they were practical preparation for exactly this scenario. "What about Mom?" Trevor asked as they prepared to depart. Riley paused, considering how much to tell his son. "Your mother is with Wolf. They made their choice." Trevor's expression hardened. "She helped them. When they first came, she let them in. I heard her talking to Wolf before they grabbed me." A pain that had nothing to do with physical injuries tightened Riley's chest. "I know, but right now, we need to focus on getting to safety. We can talk about everything else later." The boy nodded, determination replacing hurt in his eyes. "What's the plan?" "We leave through the tunnel, make our way to a vehicle I've staged nearby, then drive to a safe house. New identities, new start." Trevor absorbed this without visible shock, another indication of how Riley's training had prepared him. "For how long?" "Indefinitely," Riley answered honestly. "We can't come back, Trevor. Not to this life." Understanding dawned in the boy's eyes. "Because of what you really do. You're not really a government consultant, are you?" "No," Riley admitted. "But that discussion needs to wait until we're secure. Right now, I need you to follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" Trevor straightened, a glimpse of the man he would become showing through the teenage exterior. "Yes, sir." Riley led them through the tunnel to the garden shed, pausing to check the perimeter before guiding Trevor across neighboring yards toward the hospital parking lot. The emergency vehicles provided continuing cover as they reached the SUV and departed the area. 2 hours later, they arrived at the safe house, a modest cabin near the Chesapeake Bay, isolated enough for security but close enough to transportation hubs if rapid evacuation became necessary. As Trevor explored the cabin, Riley secured the perimeter and established communication with his Montgomery residence contact. The news was mixed. Lewis had gone completely off-grid, his current whereabouts unknown. Wolf and Marlene had been taken into custody by a FBI task force, but had been transferred to an undisclosed location for questioning. The house in Baltimore remained under surveillance, but the authorities appeared unaware that Riley and Trevor had already escaped. When Riley returned inside, he found Trevor sitting at the kitchen table, his expression serious beyond his years. "I'm ready for the truth now, Dad," he said simply. Riley sat across from his son, the weight of 15 years of secrets finally lifting. "My real work has always been classified. I've done things for this country that can never be acknowledged publicly. Dangerous things. Things that would have put you and your mother at risk if they became known. You kill people," Trevor stated rather than asked, his voice steady. "Bad people." Riley met his son's gaze directly. "Yes, people who threaten national security. Terrorists. Spies. Sometimes corrupt officials or criminals beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement." Trevor absorbed this without flinching. "And that's why you were gone so much. Why you missed games and birthdays." "Yes. I tried to balance both worlds, but it was never really possible." "Your mother." Riley paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your mother found that life increasingly difficult to accept. So she betrayed you." Trevor finished, anger flashing in his eyes. "She helped them try to kill you." "The situation is complicated," Riley acknowledged. "But yes, she made choices that put both of us in danger." Trevor's hands clenched into fists on the table. "They threatened me. Made me call you. Said they'd make me watch while they killed you." "I know," Riley said softly. "And I promise you, they will pay for that. But not through direct confrontation, not right now. We need to disappear, establish new identities, new lives." Let the agencies deal with Lewis and his conspirators. And just forget what Mom did. Trevor challenged. Riley shook his head. Not forget. Never forget. But we focus on survival first. Justice comes later. The wisdom of his words seemed to reach Trevor, who nodded slowly. What happens to us now? We adapt. We survive. We build something new, Riley replied. I have resources, money, identities, properties in places where no one from my former life can find us. You'll have opportunities, Trevor. College, a career, a normal life, eventually. Without Mom, Trevor said, his voice caught between sadness and anger. Yes, Riley confirmed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some choices have permanent consequences. Trevor was silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, he looked up at his father, determination hardening his features. Teach me. Teach you what? Riley asked, though he already suspected the answer. Everything, Trevor replied. How to disappear. How to survive. How to make sure nobody can ever threaten us again. Riley studied his son's face, recognizing the same unflinching resolve he saw in his own reflection. The path ahead would be challenging. New identities, new location, constant vigilance. But they would face it together, father and son against whatever came next. All right, Riley agreed. We start tomorrow. Outside, the storm finally began to clear, dark clouds giving way to patches of blue sky. A new beginning, forged in betrayal, but leading towards something neither of them could yet fully envision. Something that, for the first time in Riley's life, might actually be called freedom. Chapter 9, The Resolution. 6 months later, the coastal town of Newport, Oregon welcomed early spring with misty mornings and spectacular sunsets. The modest house on the bluff overlooking the Pacific had become home to Richard and Tyler Bennett, a father and son who had moved from the East Coast following a family tragedy. The locals knew little about them except that Richard worked remotely as a security consultant and his son was a promising student at the local high school. Riley, now living completely as Richard Bennett, stood on the deck watching the waves crash against the rocky shoreline below. The wooden railings beneath his hands were still rough, part of the ongoing renovations he'd undertaken since purchasing the property through an untraceable shell company. The lifestyle change had been significant, but manageable. His years of operational experience had prepared Riley for maintaining cover identities, and Trevor had adapted to his new name and background with remarkable resilience. The boy's natural athletic abilities had quickly earned him a place on the school basketball team, providing social connections that helped establish their presence in the community. Their security protocols remained rigorous. Riley maintained multiple early warning systems around the property, regularly swept for surveillance devices, and kept go-bags packed and ready at all times. But gradually, the hypervigilance that had characterized their first weeks in Newport had eased into a more sustainable routine. The sliding glass door opened behind him, and Trevor stepped onto the deck, school backpack slung over one shoulder. Coach says college scouts might come to Friday's game, he announced, a hint of excitement breaking through his typically reserved demeanor. Riley smiled. That's great. You've put in the work. You deserve the recognition. Trevor joined him at the railing, both Blackwood men, now Bennett's, staring out at the horizon. The past months had aged the boy in subtle ways. He stood taller, his eyes more watchful, his movements more deliberate. The trauma of their escape had left marks, but also forged a deeper bond between father and son. Any news? Trevor asked, the question that had become part of their daily ritual. Riley nodded slightly. Some. Mason's contact confirmed that Lewis was found dead in Bogota 3 weeks ago. Apparent suicide, though the circumstances suggest otherwise. Trevor absorbed this with a thoughtful nod. Agency cleanup? Most likely, Riley confirmed. With the cryptocurrency still unrecovered, too many powerful people wanted Lewis silenced. And the others? Riley's expression hardened. Wolf remains in federal custody at an undisclosed location. The official charges relate to espionage, but the real interrogation revolves around the Moscow operation. He's apparently cooperating in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Trevor's hands tightened on the railing. And Mom. This remained the most difficult topic between them. The betrayal that had shattered their family and forced them into their current exile. Limited witness protection, Riley replied. She provided testimony against Lewis's network in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She's living under a new identity somewhere in the Midwest. Do you think she'll try to find us? Trevor asked, his voice carefully neutral. Riley had considered this possibility extensively. It's unlikely. The terms of her agreement almost certainly restrict her movements and communications. And she knows that I would detect any attempt to approach us. Good, Trevor said firmly. The anger he harbored toward his mother had not diminished with time. In many ways, her betrayal had cut him deeper than it had Riley. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching seabirds wheel above the waves. Finally, Trevor spoke again, his voice lower, more hesitant. I found something online. About Moscow. Riley turned to face his son, immediately alert. What specifically? A news article about the death of a Russian businessman, Kirovsky. It mentioned unusual financial transactions immediately preceding his death. Cryptocurrency transfers worth billions. Riley maintained a neutral expression while internally calculating how to respond. Trevor had demonstrated remarkable aptitude for intelligence gathering over the past months, absorbing Riley's teachings with natural talent. This development, while concerning, wasn't entirely unexpected. What made you look into Moscow? Riley asked carefully. Trevor shrugged. Pieces of what you've told me. Things I overheard during that night. I've been trying to understand what really happened. Riley considered his options. The boy was 16, no longer a child to be shielded from difficult truths, but not yet an adult with the emotional framework to handle the full complexity of international espionage and betrayal. The Moscow operation was my final assignment, Riley began, deciding that partial truth was better than continued secrecy. Kirovsky possessed information that threatened national security, data that could compromise operations and operatives worldwide. My mission was to eliminate him and secure that data. The $3 billion everyone was after, Trevor concluded. Riley nodded. The value wasn't just monetary. The cryptocurrency wallets contained access keys to intelligence that could topple governments, expose agents, and reveal decades of covert operations. And that's why Lewis betrayed the agency? For money. Power more than money, Riley corrected. With that intelligence, Lewis could have sold secrets to the highest bidders for years, controlled officials through blackmail, manipulated international policy. Trevor processed this information with the serious consideration that had become characteristic of him. Is it still out there? The data? No, Riley said definitively. The encryption keys were destroyed during the extraction from Moscow. Lewis believed I had them. That's why he came after us. But the truth is, they're gone. Permanently. This wasn't entirely accurate. The encryption keys existed in only one place, Riley's memory. He had memorized the complex string of characters during the Moscow operation, never recording them in any form. It was insurance, leverage to keep powerful people from pursuing him and Trevor too aggressively. So all of this, leaving our home, changing our names, starting over, it was for nothing? Trevor asked, frustration edging his voice. Not for nothing, Riley corrected gently. For safety. For freedom. The people Lewis worked with still don't know for certain that the keys are destroyed. Some of them might continue searching for us, believing we have access to the Moscow data. Trevor considered this, then asked the question Riley had been waiting for. Will we ever go back? To our real lives. Riley gazed out at the ocean, the endless horizon offering no easy answers. This is our real life now, Trevor. Richard and Tyler Bennett. The people we were, they don't exist anymore. But someday, Trevor pressed, when it's safe. When everyone who betrayed us is paid. Riley recognized the hunger for justice, or perhaps vengeance, in his son's eyes. It was a reflection of his own, carefully controlled but never extinguished. Justice takes many forms, Riley said carefully. Sometimes it's swift and direct. Sometimes it works through official channels. And sometimes, he paused, choosing his words deliberately. Sometimes it's simply outliving your enemies, building something they can never touch or destroy. Trevor digested this philosophy, clearly not entirely satisfied but willing to accept it for now. I should head to practice, he said finally, checking his watch. I'll pick you up at 6, Riley replied. Be aware of my surroundings at all times, Trevor finished with a small smile. I know, Dad. As Trevor departed, Riley remained on the deck, his thoughts turning to the secure satellite phone hidden in his office safe. For 6 months, it had remained silent, the emergency contact method that only 2 people in the world knew existed. 3 days ago, it had received a text message. Phoenix Protocol initiated. Confirmation required. Phoenix Protocol, the highest-level reinstatement procedure, used only when an operative's skills were deemed essential to national security despite previous complications. Riley had left the message unanswered, unwilling to risk the stability he and Trevor had established. His secure tablet contained the full briefing that had followed the initial contact, a situation developing in Eastern Europe that threatened to escalate into open conflict. An oligarch with connections to ultranationalist military factions had acquired biological weapons technology. Intelligence suggested deployment was imminent, with catastrophic potential casualties. The mission parameters were straightforward: eliminate the threat, secure the technology, leave no evidence of U.S. involvement. The kind of operation Riley had executed dozens of times throughout his career. Only this mission had one additional detail that made it impossible to ignore. The oligarch's chief of security was listed as Damon Wolf, recently released from federal custody under classified circumstances. Wolf had survived, escaped justice, and returned to operations. The man who had threatened Trevor, who had manipulated Marlene, who had nearly destroyed everything Riley valued, was active again. Riley's phone buzzed with a message from Trevor. "Coach wants me to stay late. Can you pick up at 7? Confirmed. Focus on your game," Riley texted back, decision crystallizing in his mind. He returned inside and entered his office, unlocking the hidden safe behind a landscape painting. The satellite phone waited within, its message still displayed on the screen. Riley picked it up and typed a single word in response: proceeding. Within seconds, operational details populated the device: timeframes, location data, target confirmation protocols. The mission would require a 3-week absence, explained to Trevor as an overseas security consulting job. Riley began methodical preparation, mentally transitioning back into operational mode. The skills remained sharp. He had continued training daily, maintaining physical conditioning and tactical readiness despite their civilian cover. This would be different from his previous operations. Not sanctioned elimination of a security threat, but personal vengeance wrapped in official authorization. Wolf had escaped justice once. Riley would ensure it didn't happen again. As evening approached, Riley drove to the high school to collect Trevor, watching with pride as his son executed a perfect 3-point shot in the final minutes of practice. The boy jogged over to the car, tossing his gear in the back seat before sliding into the passenger seat. "Good practice?" Riley asked, pulling away from the school. "Coach says my defensive positioning has improved," Trevor replied, then studied his father's face intently. "Something's changed. What is it?" Riley smiled slightly at his son's perceptiveness, another trait that would serve him well in life. "I've been offered a short-term contract. Security consultation for a European technology firm. 3 weeks, starting Monday." Trevor's eyes narrowed slightly. "A real contract or—" "Real enough," Riley answered honestly, "but with a personal component." Understanding dawned in Trevor's expression. "Wolf," Riley nodded once, confirming without elaborating. Trevor was silent for several moments, processing this development. "Will it be dangerous?" "Manageable risk," Riley assured him. "Standard operational parameters." "And when it's done, what then?" Riley considered the question carefully. "Then we continue building our life here. More secure than before." Trevor nodded slowly, acceptance rather than enthusiasm. "I want to know when it's finished. When he's paid for what he did to us." "You will," Riley promised. "And afterward, no more looking back. We focus on your future, college, career, whatever you choose to pursue." The promise of finality seemed to satisfy Trevor. The remaining drive passed with discussion of basketball strategies and upcoming school assignments. The normal conversations of father and son that had become increasingly natural over the past months. Later that night, after Trevor had gone to bed, Riley stood again on the deck, watching stars emerge above the Pacific. The decision to accept the mission brought with it both risk and potential closure. Wolf represented the last significant threat to their new life, the final loose end from a past Riley had worked to leave behind. Justice, vengeance, protection. The lines between them had always been blurred in Riley's work. This final mission would serve all 3 purposes, eliminating a legitimate security threat while settling a deeply personal score. As the ocean waves crashed rhythmically against the cliffs below, Riley allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the operation. Trevor graduating high school, attending college, building a life unencumbered by the shadows that had defined his father's existence. Perhaps even reconciliation with Marlene someday, if Trevor chose to pursue it. But first, there was Wolf, the man who had orchestrated the collapse of Riley's carefully constructed life, who had threatened Trevor, who had corrupted Marlene. In 3 days, Riley Blackwood, the ghost, would emerge from retirement one final time. And Damon Wolf would learn the truth that all of Riley's previous targets had discovered too late. Nobody who threatened his family lived to tell about it.